Song of Iron is a Viking-themed side-scroller developed entirely by one person, a guy by the name of Joe Winter. The fact that Joe was the only one to create the entire game is an important detail to note here, as unlike AAA games with dozens, if not hundreds of people involved, it's a lot more difficult to apply the same level of scrutiny to a single individual. As such, I'm going to apply constructive criticism to any issues I have with the game as opposed to blistering scorn. First, let's take a look at all the areas of the game that absolutely excel. The environment and general atmosphere in Song of Iron is excellent. Your character moves at a rather quick pace, which in turn causes the detailed landscapes to constantly shift from sunlit hills to shadowed caves, as the ritualistic rhythm of Norse folk music drives the player forward with elevated ambience and determined purpose. In addition to the environment, character models are also very detailed and vary between Vikings and trolls to giant trolls. Another great visual detail relates to how enemies will flood in from the background at different angles, giving a large sense of depth to the world. Combat is fast-paced and about on par with what you'd expect from a hack-and-slash action side-scroller, featuring light and heavy attacks, a shield to block incoming attacks, and a bow for picking off enemies at a distance. Stamina also plays a part as it depletes for every attack, dodge, and of course while you're sprinting. It does recharge fast enough though, but you'll still need to keep an eye on it in combat by retreating in order to recover enough to continue your onslaught. Shields do disintegrate after blocking a few hits, but nearly every enemy in the game carries one which you can pick up after dispatching them to Valhalla. You can also dodge roll to get some iframes, which means you'll probably be rolling away to avoid most incoming attacks. This is almost always the strategy when dealing with larger enemies, as you can get in an attack or two before dodging out of the way and repeating that strategy until they collapse like a sack of potatoes. I know I say this a lot when reviewing indie action games like this, but I really wish a parry counter mechanic was the standard across the board. Song of Iron could really benefit from being able to block right before an attack lands, opening the opponent to a fatal blow. That one addition would absolutely elevate the combat in this game, so Joe, if you're listening, give that feature some thought. As you progress through Song of Iron, you'll also come across armor upgrades which often give you toggleable enhancements, like being able to sprint faster or apply fire or lightning elemental damage to your weapons. Those aforementioned details cover what Song of Iron does really well, so now let's delve into things that could be improved upon. In between combat sections, the game becomes a bit of a puzzle-solving platformer. Most of these puzzles are fine, but there are certainly a few that can absolutely break your momentum, grinding gameplay to a halt. The main reason for this stems from the fact that certain puzzles require you to notice or remember specific details that are no longer in frame, meaning you likely need to push some kind of block back to a previous section in order to progress. This can be very confusing, given that 95% of the time you're always running forward and to the right. There are at least two puzzle areas that suffer from this, but they could be remedied with the aid of more distinct visual cues. Mainly, you'll often need to climb vines in order to progress vertically, but you may not even be aware that these vines exist due to color similarities between the vines and the rest of the environment. They're generally very similar in color to that of the grass or other areas of the background, and as such, they don't often stand out. My suggestion here would be to add some kind of highlight or similar visual indicator based on proximity to the player, so that as the player runs by them, some kind of visual change occurs to inform the player that this object is interactable. This would greatly solve for a couple of momentum-breaking puzzles which require you to backtrack to a previous scene, as in both cases the vines are unreachable until you move the blocks backwards from the next scene in order to reach them. Having a visual indicator would at least provide some clue to the player that this out-of-reach object is another path worth exploring, given that there are 0 visual indicators in the following scene to illustrate where you're supposed to go. Visual indicators will also be useful for these hammer-shaped runestones, as I didn't even realize you could interact with them until my second playthrough, and given that they restore all health, stamina, and magic, are fairly important to use. My final critique is a tough one because I know Joe spent an entire decade making Song of Iron and should be rewarded for his efforts, but I feel like the price point for the game is too steep given the number of hours required to complete it. For $20, similar Viking-themed games for the same price like Valheim provide the player with upwards of 50+ hours of gameplay, while you can tear through Song of Iron in entirety in under 2. It's great if you're looking to play a cheap game to get through in an afternoon, but it's tough to justify $10 an hour for this experience, given similar games at the same price provide so much more. Lowering the price to even $15 might make the purchase all the more justifiable, at least in my opinion. Song of Iron is an extremely impressive feat for one person to create, and with a few small improvements could really be polished to perfection. And while the game itself isn't extremely long, the time spent with it is enjoyable and memorable enough to make it worth your time, especially if you can get it on sale. So in summary, nice work, Mr. Winter. I'll definitely keep an eye out for any DLC or other games you end up creating in the future. What did you think of Song of Iron? Let me know down in the comments. And as always, you can greatly help out my channel by sending these buttons to Allfather Odin. Also be sure to check out my first playthrough for Song of Iron on Twitch, link below in the description. Thanks again for watching.
See you in the next one.